Selections on the topic of negative emotions by George Gurdjieff, as quoted in the book In Search of the Miraculous by Peter Uspensky. Gurdjieff. In the sphere of the emotions, it is very useful to try to struggle with the habit of giving immediate expression to all one's unpleasant emotions. Many people find it very difficult to refrain from expressing their feelings about bad weather. It is still more difficult for people not to express unpleasant emotions when they feel that something or someone is violating what they may conceive to be order or justice. Besides being a very good method for self-observation, the struggle against expressing unpleasant emotions has at the same time another significance. It is one of the few directions in which a man can change himself or his habits without creating other undesirable habits. Therefore, self-observation and self-study must, from the first, be accompanied by the struggle against the expression of unpleasant emotions. Uspensky's comment. I at once felt something big behind this, and the future showed that I was right, for the study of emotions and the work on emotions became the basis of the subsequent development of the whole system. Gurdjieff. We come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves, but we can remember ourselves only if we have in us the energy for self-remembering. Energy is spent chiefly on unnecessary and unpleasant emotions, on the expectation of unpleasant things, possible and impossible, on bad moods, on unnecessary haste, nervousness, irritability, imagination, daydreaming, and so on unnecessary tension of the muscles out of all proportion to the work produced, on perpetual chatter, which absorbs an enormous amount of energy, on the interest continually taken in things happening around us or to other people, and having in fact no interest whatever, and on the constant waste of the force of attention. A great deal of energy is also spent on work which is completely unnecessary and harmful in every respect, such as on the activity of unpleasant emotions, on the expression of unpleasant sensations, on worry, on restlessness, on haste, and on a whole series of automatic actions which are completely useless. It must be noted that the organism usually produces in the course of one day all the substances necessary for the following day. And it very often happens that all these substances are spent or consumed upon some unnecessary and, as a rule, unpleasant emotion. Bad moods, worry, the expectation of something unpleasant, doubt, fear, a feeling of injury, irritation. Each of these emotions, in reaching a certain degree of intensity, may, in half an hour or even half a minute, consume all the substances prepared for the next day, while a single flash of anger or some other violent emotion can at once explode all the substances prepared in the laboratory and leave a man quite empty inwardly for a long time, or even forever. Gurdjieff, speaking about this, what is called the second conscious shock in the fourth way, related to transformation, which is preceded by the first conscious shock of self-remembering. Gurdjieff. The effort which creates this shock must consist in work on the emotions, in the transformation and transmutation of the emotions. This transmutation of the emotions will then help the transmutation of C12 in the human organism. No serious growth, that is, no growth of higher bodies within the organism, is possible without this transmutation. The idea of this transmutation was known to many ancient teachings, as well as to some comparatively recent ones, such as the alchemy of the Middle Ages. But the alchemists spoke of this transmutation in the allegorical forms of the transformation of base metals into precious ones. In reality, however, they meant the transformation of coarse hydrogens into finer ones in the human organism, chiefly of the transformation of Me12. If this transformation is attained, a man can be said to have achieved what he was striving for, and it can also be said that until this transformation is attained, all results attained by a man can be lost because they are not fixed in him in any way. Moreover, they are attained only in the spheres of thought and emotion. Real objective results can be obtained only after the transmutation of Me12 has begun. Alchemists who spoke of this transmutation began directly with it. They knew nothing, or at least they said nothing, about the nature of the first volitional shock. It is upon this, however, that the whole thing depends. The second volitional shock and transmutation become physically possible only after long practice on the first volitional shock, which consists in self-remembering and in observing the impressions as they are received. On the way of the monk and on the way of the fakir, work on the second shock begins before work on the first shock. But because Me12 is created only as a result of the first shock, work in the absence of other material has of necessity to be concentrated on C12, and it very often gives quite wrong results. Right development on the fourth way must begin with the first volitional shock, and then pass on to the second shock at Me12. The third stage in the work of the human organism begins when man creates in himself a second conscious volitional shock at the point Me12, when the transformation or transmutation of these hydrogens into higher hydrogens begins in him. The second stage and the beginning of the third stage refer to the life and functions of man number 4. A fairly considerable period of transmutation and crystallization is needed for the transition of man number 4 to the level of man number 5. The practice of not expressing unpleasant emotions, of not identifying, of not considering inwardly, are all preparation for the second effort, the second conscious shock. If we now take the work of the human factory as a whole, we shall be able to see the moments when the production of fine substances is arrested, by what means we can increase the productivity of the factory. We see that under ordinary conditions and working with one mechanical shock, the factory produces a very small quantity of the fine substances. In fact, only C12. Working with one mechanical and one conscious shock, the factory now produces a much greater quantity of the fine substances. While working with two conscious shocks, the factory will produce a quantity of the fine substances such as in the course of time will completely change the character of the factory itself. The transition of matter C12 into emanations and the gradual saturation of the whole organism by it is what alchemy calls transmutation or transformation. The transformation of the coarse into the fine.